Welcome, Dr. Scott Poland. It is such a pleasure to have you on the Sound Off. Maybe an extra pleasure for me because it's just been so long. You and I have both been so busy out there doing our thing, and it's a unique pleasure to come back together because you were one of the very first people to reach out and support our mission at Safe and Sound all those years ago. So it's just extra special to have you here and be able to share you with our community.
Well, thank you.
All right, my friend, you know what's coming. I'm going to ask you what your goofy superpower is before we talk serious stuff. Let's break the ice a little bit and share something. Many of our listeners are listening today because they know you. They have read many of your publications. They have attended many of your seminars. They're already following you and the great best practice guidance that you provide in the field. But they probably don't know something about you. So what is it? What's your super secret superpower?
Well, Michelle, I am really adventurous. I mean, we're talking skydiving, hang gliding, waterfall rappelling. But you know what I'm proudest to tell you about my career? I raised the money and I built 3 ropes courses in my school district in Houston, Texas. And I ran that program, and 100,000 students participated, with high elements working on trust and self-esteem, low elements working on problem solving and communication. And I just think we have to find more ways to reach all of our students.
Amen. And outside, I'm all about that. I am afraid of heights, but I do love a good ropes course. There's something about it. It's incredibly confidence building, team building, the interaction that you see among youth and adults. You see that cross generational kind of connection. It's kind of amazing. And I would have never guessed. I know how adventurous you are, but I did not know about the ropes courses. And I did not know that you ran those programs. So very inspiring, very inspiring. I feel like I need to get out there and climb today after our chat. Well, thank you for playing along. That's always just fun. It's a fun way to start. So thanks for humoring me. But we do have some pretty serious content to dive into today. And many of our folks are listening because what we're going to talk about today with social media and youth mental health is probably one of the most timely and pressing of the many concerns that we address in our work for comprehensive school safety across the country and North America now. So, what do we mean? I mean, it's just so big. I feel in many ways that mental health has become this sort of catch-all for many schools, many communities, and when things become a big giant catch-all, they sometimes feel overwhelming and impossible to address. So let's break that down so we can get to the good stuff so that we can all walk away feeling like we have something to bring back to our communities in terms of social media and youth mental health. What are we talking about here?
Well, unfortunately, there is a lot of concern about increased mental health issues with youth. A lot of it has come about with the smartphone, and the heavy users of social media in particular, the research are emphasizing, are having the most difficulty. But it's almost like, where do we start? Because I like to share with parents that technology should be viewed as a privilege, not a right. And I think the importance of family decisions and modeling by parents, paying attention and co-viewing, especially when they're starting out with smaller children. And, I have the same issue even with my own grandchildren, trying to figure out, where do I start with the conversation about their social media and their screen time? And here's a phrase I love: more green time, less screen time.
Hey, I mean that goes with our opening conversation about getting outside and just moving our bodies and interacting face to face. Absolutely. I love that. Okay. I think you should trademark that. More green time, less screen time.
Yes, and the Surgeon General has put out several really important advisories about mental health and social media in particular. But let's face it, an adolescent isn't going to change their screen time overnight. In fact, I had this conversation with my oldest grandchild, which was really sort of like, well, do you ever think you're missing out on some things that you'd like to do more of because of screen time? And really just trying to get kids to be a little more mindful. If they
Hmm.
really think about it, they might respond with, I could really be in person with my friends more. I could maybe get more sleep. I might need that. I mean, my grades might even improve a bit if I manage this better. And I think the most important thing I could say today is we need to start with young children
Yeah.
and figure out a way that schools can help the parents of young children be a little more mindful, set more limit about screen time for their children.
So it's a really good point. And I'm just going to throw myself under the bus here and admit, how social media use, how the screen itself became so heavily used in my own household. So when the iPad sort of dawned, that was a real game changer in our family. At the time, the girls were all pretty young, elementary school age, preschool age, and we got them, a big iMac computer, right? And we set it up in the family room as per, best practice guidance, so that it would be something we would all be doing together, and nobody would be unsupervised. But I feel like there was a big turning point when we got into these more handheld devices. And part of it was, my husband and I both had our own smartphone, right? And we were becoming increasingly engaged on the device, which our kids are watching and they're observing, and whatever it is that has our attention, they want some of that. And so they're naturally drawn to that. And you'd be at a restaurant or in a pinch trying to you know have an important phone call or something, and it was all too tempting to just kind of hand that device over to your child. And there were, even at the time, some cool games that kids could play. It was kind of like the beginning. The door was cracking, right? And then our Josephine, she got an iPad to help with communication. So her communication device was attached to the iPad, and it wasn't long before we realized, oh my goodness, she's figured out how to circumvent all of the security and get on, YouTube, and start exploring and getting into all kinds of things that she doesn't need to be. And by the way, she can carry it around the house. She can be wherever, she wants to be with it. So some of those more traditional rules that applied in terms of like computer use in the home and how we could all participate more as a family, they just began to sort of fall away. And then, as my older girls got to middle school age, all of their peers were getting a smartphone. So a lot of us parents were, here you can start out with a simple flip phone. We want you to have that for emergencies. Many parents want their kids to have that for emergencies. But eventually, the pressure to get that smartphone in their hands, just people acquiesce to that, and there's a lot of wonderful reasons that you want a computer in your hands at all times, but essentially, we've opened our kids up to the Wild West, and we weren't ready. So, what would you say about the fact that the horse is kind of out of the barn right now, Dr. Poland? How do we help our kids? How do we help our families shift back to a more human existence?
I had the chance to speak at our grandchildren's school in Georgia, and our own daughter is sitting there. And I was really trying to basically say, slow this down. Don't be in a hurry. Let them be children as long as possible. And there is an organization called wait until 8.
Mm.
And they are really trying to connect like-minded parents, because every kid is going to say, all my friends have a smartphone. But if there's a local chapter, a parent can say, as a matter of fact, Beverly's parents are not giving her a smartphone until the end of 8th grade. And then I think we have to have meetings in a family about technology usage, about where things are located, about the devices at least being out of the bedroom at nighttime. But I'm really glad you talked about setting it up in the family room, but also the idea of a blackout night. Everybody is going to turn off technology Thursday evening from 7 to 9, and we're going to do something old fashioned like a board game. And then also no technology at mealtime. I
Mhm.
often hear from moms, it's my husband. He won't put his phone down while we eat. So that's back to the modeling.
Yeah.
And, I think one of our greatest challenges is what's reasonable for schools to do. If some of the listeners agree with some of these points that I'm making, that how could a school district, maybe at least start families in the right way?
Mhm. It's a really good point. I think a lot of our communities, a lot of our parents, they look to the school for that kind of guidance or those kind of resources. It's either an expectation, or it's just, I'm in over my head. What can you provide for me? So it is an interesting sort of turn of events. In some of our schools and communities, parents really don't want to be told what to do by the schools. But here, I think we see in this area, lots of our parents are reaching out kind of in an SOS fashion. What can we do here? What kind of guidance can you provide? I want to point out a resource that we created with Snap Inc. To guide parents in terms of some of these very topics that we're talking about, and what are some of the things that parents need to be aware of as their kids are getting online. What are some of the rules of the road, and what are some of the measures that we can put in place? You mentioned, Scott, that that often sort of a blackout period is recommended, and we talk about that in that guidance that we provided. Folks can find it on our website, but it's parents' guidance for social media with students, and in particular, some of these messaging platforms. So those blackouts, maybe turning the Wi-Fi off, to just ensure it's not even a temptation. It's not a thing. The temptation is real, and parents are very much a part of it. I think we're just as addicted, maybe more so. And so our kids see that, and it's kind of, they're doing what we're doing, right?
Absolutely. Michelle, here are a couple ideas I have for schools. And of course, there's been quite a movement in schools about restricting, banning cell phones. Uh, with regards to that, I think it's important for schools to get parental input, student input as they develop whatever their policy is going to be, and then to enforce it. I met with some high school students the other day, and the policy locally is clearly no cell phones in schools, yet it seems like policy is sort of ignored. But schools have OIT people, and they are pretty up to date with like everything about app technology. And I know we're probably not going to get parents to come just to a meeting that has to do with social media and technology, but maybe working a few minutes into typical school parent presentations, maybe having some articles in school newsletters, some information on school district websites, for example. Perhaps there could be a link to the Surgeon General's advisory. But I want to try out one thing that I really recommend. Parent-teacher conferences every October, everywhere. So let's imagine that Charlie is 8 years old, and the teacher, of course, just went over academics and behavior. How about a gentle question like this? Do you mind? Could we talk about screen time for your child? And maybe some parents would say, absolutely not. But I think most parents would say, in fact, all the data would indicate they're worried, they're concerned. And then the teacher could be empowered with data from like the American Medical Association about what is the recommendation for an 8-year-old. And here's a little rule of thumb that I've been sharing: 10 minutes a day per age of a child. So that means if they're 8, that's 80 minutes. And really, they're emphasizing everything that has to do with the screen. And of course, we're pretty far away from that. And I even like to ask attendees in conferences, how often do you see a kid playing outside? And the answer is almost always not very often. But just the idea that schools could offer more information to parents, I think many parents would be appreciative.
So another strategy, as I think about it, because those conferences are super valuable. Just having the conversation, just opening up that conversation. One thing I know I found really helpful with parents is just asking for my own interest, right? So as a classroom teacher, was a resource to lots of parents that would
Mhm.
come to me. Do you know where I can go to find this? Or are there any recommendations around that? Or fill in the blanks. And so I found it really helpful to open the conversation by just simply saying, how do you handle this? What are some of the strategies that you have for blank? And in this case, managing screen time. How are you getting your kids outside? And inevitably, they'll have something to share, or it will prompt them to realize, this is kind of an issue for me. But I can then be the person who collects a lot of those ideas and shares kind of the wealth of our little parent community in that classroom. So just in the past few minutes here, we already talked about wait until 8, and I believe they have a website, correct? Is there?
They definitely do.
So we can just search wait until 8, meaning eighth grade, right?
Great. Yes.
Um, we talked about at Safe and Sound, you can find the Safe, Sound, and Healthy Digital Environments. It's a practical toolkit for educators and parents. The parent companion guide is coming out very shortly. So quite a lot of resources in addition to just getting people talking about it and being a resource for themselves. So I love too that practical takeaway though that you had 10 minutes plus the age, right? Is it 10 minutes times or plus? Tell me
Or
the
10
recipe
minutes
again.
times the age. So
Okay.
basically 80 minutes for an 8-year-old, and for a 15-year-old, 150 minutes. So yes. And there's an interesting lawsuit that's happening right now.
Let's talk about this.
So I actually got subpoenaed the other day and was shocked, but um, I did some work for the Jordan School District years ago. They had some significant problems with youth suicide. But this lawsuit, Jordan School District in Utah is the lead plaintiff, and there are 11 other districts that joined together. The lawsuit is against TikTok and Meta. And I imagine the listeners are sort of like, why would they be suing these platforms and companies? And basically, school districts are very concerned about mental health needs of young people, and they've had to add mental health personnel, I think, particularly in the last decade.
Yeah.
And the lawsuit is basically, the premise is we've had to increase our school mental health personnel because of the impact of these social media platforms. And I suspect this is a lawsuit that'll take a long time to be decided, but it's certainly an interesting premise.
It really is because I don't think there is a school that we're involved with that would disagree with the fact that there is at least a corollary between the level of social media engagement among our youth and our mental health issues and our skyrocketing suicide rates. I mean, we can't we can't in all cases point to a direct corollary, but you can't deny the data. It's absolutely breathtaking to appreciate. And so um it only makes sense that that would become, it's a resource issue. It is what it is. We'll do our best in our communities to have these conversations and help our youth and our families navigate, help our schools navigate. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But it's a resource issue at the end of the day. In order to do that, it is taking extraordinary resources from our communities and our school districts in particular.
Absolutely. And we really have to figure out a way to attract more people to become a school counselor, school social worker, school psychologist. I'm sure you're aware that there's quite a shortage nationally. And with these increasing mental health needs of students, and we just need more people.
Yeah, and I think what I hear from a lot of our mental health practitioners, our school psychs, our school social workers, and school counselors is it just feels like fighting a forest fire with a garden hose at this point. The issues are so big, so many, and so complex, and they're just feeling like they don't have the resources, and they do need sleep at night, and they do need to recharge, and so we are really looking at kind of a crossroads here.
Well, I think very important that we get input from school staff, parents, and students themselves and try to balance all this. One of the things that parents today really want to be able to reach their kid in a moment notice. Okay? And you don't have to have a smartphone to be able to do that. And particularly at the elementary school level, you mentioned earlier, there's old style flip phones. There are watches that allow kids to make 5 calls to mom, dad, grandpa, 911. So I think helping parents not be in such a hurry for it to be a smartphone. And then this whole concept of digital citizenship. And there's actually another website that I really like called rethinkwords.com. When a kid has that on their smartphone, basically that app asks, is this really what you want to say? Because it recognizes mean and hurtful language. And the organization has really great data that when kids get that message, like, is this what you want to say? That almost always they either don't send it or they modify it. And so it's just really trying to get kids themselves to think. But I think we just have to really emphasize parents. The technology is a privilege, it's not a right. You're paying for the smartphones, you're paying for the internet connection, and talk with your kids about this and realize that there are some things you really must pay attention to. And you said something really important earlier about at a restaurant, everyone sees it. The phone is handed to a small child immediately. And wouldn't we all really like to have our children learn to talk with the family 40 minutes at a restaurant? And so I think all of this starts early, and hopefully this podcast will raise awareness for school staff as well as parents that maybe a lot of things have gone in the wrong direction, but it's not too late to try to get a little more control of all of this.
No, the beauty of those little brains is that they are so very plastic, right? They are just so resilient, so responsive to new settings and to new stimuli. So, it's never too late. But I think he has such an interesting point though about hand we're all just too quick, I think, to hand the kid a device to just kind of soothe that awkward moment out in public. And I think we've become a little too sensitive, about that. But I think about, going to a restaurant in days of old, like when I was a kid. My mom, she brought, coloring books for us, things that we could put, but we were not completely disengaged with what was going on at the table, for example. And I think that's something that uh, is unique, and has perhaps conditioned parents to go back to that device as a means for getting a child to calm down, because they really do completely disengage. They kind of go into another world on their game or their app or their movie or whatever that may be. How do you feel about the potential of a corollary between that and, the social emotional deficits that we are observing nationwide, as educators? Our kids are not coming to school with the same level of capability of social skills, that they did in years past. What would you say about that?
Well, I think that's an excellent point. And probably when you were growing up, and obviously I'm much older than you, but everything was outside. Okay. Your dad had to call you in for dinner. Then you went back outside. They had to call you in because
Yeah.
now it's getting dark. And what happened was you learned to get along with all the neighborhood kids. You learned to work it out. I mean, maybe somebody, didn't play a game correctly, but you talked about it, you worked it out. And, the big concern now is kids not developing in person abilities to relate to people. And I think this is very much driven by all of the screen time. And
Mhm. They have less and less experience, right?
yeah,
They just have less and less exposure to that face-to-face time, that conflict resolution, that face-to-face engagement, and so, you you just don't have as much practice, essentially.
exactly. And, you know, there has been, in the last few decades at least, a lot of concern about stranger danger. And the argument has been made that we basically brought all the kids in. They're all now all in our house. So basically, we over supervised by not letting them be outside. And now we've under supervised inside. And they have these incredibly entertaining, addictive devices. I mean, we got to be honest. I mean, they are pretty phenomenal. At my age, I have to see a lot of doctors, and you're sitting in the doctor's office, and it's not, so excruciating anymore. I mean, we're flipping through social media, right? And I just, if everyone could be more mindful of, the amount of screen time, and especially how much social media has really come to dominate the lives of our adolescents.
It truly has. It's an interesting point, Scott, about stranger danger, because we brought the kids inside because of this concept and this worry, right? So now they're inside, and if they're not right next to us or in a place where we can see them on this device, they may be engaging with that stranger anyway. So the strangers are now inside in many cases with the kids, and that's where we see some really some really very serious and dangerous situations for our students. Engagement with people who are not who they say they are, who are looking to blackmail, who are looking to manipulate, and being one of our amazing suicide prevention and intervention experts. Unfortunately, that a lot of the cases we're looking at now are related to some of these predatory online behaviors that our students are exposed to as well online.
In one of my sessions, a mom shared that her adolescent son was a victim of sextortion. And thank God he approached his parents
Oh,
and
thank
told
God.
them what was happening. But you're probably aware of other tragedies where a suicide was the result, also an extreme humiliation and the cyberbullying. I mean, it just, all of this just goes to parents and caregivers must pay more attention to all of this. And
It's true.
I like the idea of side by side co-viewing, especially when they're younger, but then parents just always having the right to sit down with them. Oh, let's see the website you've been visiting. Uh, I am your parent. I care about you. That is why we're doing this, because I care about you. And I want to know. In fact, I think parents need to demand to know what's going on with regards to screen time and social media. And of course, there are apps that help all of us know how many hours we spent on our screens.
And it's so powerful. I have all these little devices that measure how much I'm moving, how much I'm sleeping, and the beauty of those is that it measures it for me, and if I don't measure it, I'm not going to improve upon it. As you're a very data driven person yourself, being a school psychologist. So that really does hold us accountable regardless of our age. It really does give us something to measure, our behaviors by, and can be so powerful. One of our experts, who really does a lot more in um, physical safety, which now of course kind of bleeds into the cyber world these days. But Paul Tim, I believe you've met Paul
I
on a
know, Paul.
couple tours we've done together, and he's always been, really humble with his kids. He has quite a few kids. They're now adults. But he always talks about how, he realized at one point that they're digital natives. And for the first time, they actually know more than we do about most of these tools and tech out there. So rather than trying to approach the situation like we have all the answers, he recommends that we lean into their expertise. They do actually love to teach us as well, and that can provide innumerable opportunities to learn, to have those side by side moments, to see where your kids are in the digital world, and what they're up to. So there's all kinds of ways to approach this, but I do think humility is in order for those of us who realize, my goodness, my kids have skills that I don't have right now. They have knowledge that I don't have.
You're right. They're growing up in a world that, frankly, it's hard for us to understand.
It is.
And we need to ask them. And a simple question is, of course, well, how does social media make you feel? And we need to reward them for just small changes in less screen. None of this will change overnight.
Yeah.
And I'm a big believer, as you are, in the resilience and creativity of our young people. And the more we can just have conversations and have like student initiative about what they might want to get a little more control over, instead of, an old guy like me trying to say, oh, I think you should do this. It's more like, what are your thoughts? What are you thinking about all of this?
100%. I still see our staff and I still see our students really afraid to set the thing down, afraid to walk away from it. They're very tethered to their devices. And in many ways, I think that's a learned behavior. I think our students are learning that from their parents, right? Because I know I don't walk out of the house without my phone. I never get into the car without my phone. I hardly ever go on a walk without my phone. I'm just being honest here. And so our students are picking up on that. But let's maybe back the bus up and talk about the psychology of, like, why is it that parents are so adamant, because we do have some of our schools that are trying to put the phone free zones in place, the various policies that schools are trying to put in place. And of course, we have students squawking about it, but the loudest to protest seem to be the parents. So, what's behind that, Scott?
I think it is really related to school violence and parents believing that the next school shooting is right around the corner in their town. And of course, one school shooting is totally unacceptable, but I always try to get people to at least know the exact data and recognize that schools are safe places and so many things have been put in place to make schools safer, a lot of them by safe and sound schools. And it doesn't have to be a smartphone to be able to reach your kid, okay? It could be an old fashioned flip phone. And as you were talking, part of it is the notifications. We can receive hundreds of notifications a day if we don't turn it off. And we're trying to get kids to attend in classes. So we can't have them be getting a notification, every 10 minutes. And so when I see that thing that says allow notifications, I usually click no because I want to be able to concentrate. Of course,
I
I'm going
mean,
to pay
that's a
attention.
whole lesson in and of itself, I think. That's a wonderful guidance push-in lesson for all of you school counselors that are here with us today. Let's just talk about distractibility. And I mean, the notifications alone from all the various apps and whatever the heck else you signed up for, right? Those are, I mean, I know when I got to get something done, I really just have to put the phone away. I have to remove it from my environment. I won't even pick it up. Like the other thing is you use your phone for so many things. So you might be picking it up to check the time, for example, and then, oh, you notice you've got 3 or 4 text messages that you have to answer, or there's this, and now you're off. Your brain has switched, and it's going to take you energy to get back to that. So owning that reality, leaning into that reality, and helping our students see the practical hacks, really, to help us navigate those. It's designed for distraction, right? It's absolutely designed to capture us at every moment, every turn.
Absolutely. I like to put my phone away when I arrive home. In fact, our children know, well, they better call my wife because I probably put my phone away. And just, I don't know, I just really like the idea that it's now the evening. And in particular, I think it's best not to look at your phone just before you go to bed. I mean, this is all about trying to wind down and get a good night's rest. I had a mom in Georgia because I made the statement like, all right, tell your teenager 10 o'clock, time to go to bed, get a good night's rest, hand me all your technology. It'll be charged. I'll hand it back to you in the morning. She stayed behind to talk to me. And she was like, but what if my eighth grade daughter's friend needed to reach her in the middle of the night? She wouldn't be able to reach her. And I was like, well, maybe your daughter's friend should contact her parents if something is so important. But I didn't convince her. She walked away believing to be a good friend, her daughter needed to be available 24/7. And I don't know how we got to that, but again, it's like, could we start and do a better job with our elementary children? And maybe when they're in high school, this won't be such an all encompassing problem.
Truly, truly. So, like everything, start early and often. I feel like, unfortunately, this thing has gotten away from us a bit. It's not a lost cause by any means, but those of us who are working with the younger set have great opportunity, right? We can even tap into some of our older students to share lessons learned here. What's the reality of this impact? So, as we kind of round the corner here on our conversation, I'd like to look ahead. I feel like in a lot of the work that we do, when we begin to see legislation at the state or federal level, that's where a lot of the groundwork that we're doing on the day to day kind of gains real traction and momentum. What do you see on the horizon in terms of legislation around these issues, Scott? I know you're called all the time. You're asked to testify here. Subpoenaed, unfortunately, as you were in Jordan, Utah. What are you seeing in terms of legislation?
Well, there certainly are state initiatives, and Utah and Florida, and particularly, have passed some legislation. A lot of that really is addressing pornography, which we could have an entire other podcast related to that. We discussed before we started that the Prime Minister of Australia is raising the age to 16 for social media for young people. And he's really putting the onus on the platforms. They have to police it. And he's threatening fines for social media companies. And I know that many other countries are at least watching that. And for the most part in the US, it's 13. But I'm sure everybody listening is aware of kids much younger than 13 that are on the platforms. And then, with grandchildren, when I get the friend request and they're under 13, I don't accept it and I contact their parent. Now, obviously, I'm not in charge, but I can at least raise the question here of really, let's not
Yeah.
rush all of this. And I've kind of lost track of COSA, Kids Online Safety Act, which was before our Congress,
Yes.
but I don't know if it passed.
I would love to be able to tell you, but maybe some of our listeners can chime in. Let us know at info@safeandsoundschools.org. Any updates on COSA, because I feel like that was a big conversation for a while there, and a few other things have taken over the headlines since then. Boy, it's a wild news cycle right now. But yeah, we can't take our eyes off the ball here. We have to be able to return to the work, not be distracted ourselves.
I think our topic today is really like the greatest challenge of our time related to
I would agree.
kids' mental health.
Yeah,
And there
I
are
would agree.
no easy answers, but parents, schools, communities, and students themselves need to all come together. And again, we've got to reward some small steps here to lessening the impact of social media on our youth.
So, I mean, that's taken us in the direction we need to put a bow on this conversation, Scott. What continuing in that vein, if there's one thing that our listeners take away from this conversation today, I'm sure a lot of them were nodding their heads the whole way through. But what is your one thing, your call to action? This is your moment. So you take it from here. You sound off on social media and youth mental health.
So, first of all, I think many of the listeners today are parents. So, they need to think about their family and how they might move this in the right direction with lessening screen time. Then I'd like to see, because I'm going to bet today we've got a lot of teachers and school mental health personnel. How about a conversation with the principal or a conversation with the school superintendent about what is our plan? What have we done so far? How well is that working? What else could we do about this extremely important topic? And then we'll all have to follow the lawsuit. And it
Yes.
may be a long time before we know the outcome, but anything we can do to increase school mental health personnel and lessen screen time and increase green time for kids is obviously going to be to the benefit of their mental health.
Well said. Thank you, Dr. Scott Poland. This has been the Sound Off. Thank you all for joining us. Please share the podcast with friends. We got to spread the good word and make sure that all of our students, all of our schools are safe and sound. Thanks, Scott.
You're welcome.